Some critics of Buddhism argue whether Buddhism is a religion or a thought practice. Either way, it is a way of life. Buddhism is divided up into three separate parts: the Theravada, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. Buddhism is well known and continues to attract followers today. The Buddha, or Siddhartha Gautama, was the founder of Buddhism. He attempted to find a meaning of the suffering that he saw in the world around him. After many years of attempting to end his suffering, he resorted to meditation under a Bodhi tree. After many days, he became the enlightened one and reached his goals. He was able to separate himself from the negative things in the world, such as wealth, power, and lust. The core concepts of Buddhism are the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. The importance and meaning of Buddhism and Buddhist thought can be seen throughout images represented in symbols and art. Initially, there were no images of the Buddha because artists felt they could not do him justice. Thus, symbols emerged with all different meanings, which inevitably represented the Buddha. Buddhism is an expansive religion with many underlying meanings and hidden messages. Buddha images in human form appeared much later than the construction and worship of stupas and other symbols. His presence was originally indicated by footprints, a tree, a wheel of doctrine. The lack of human images until the last century BCE was something common to all classical Indian religions. Putting a date and place on the origin of the first images of the Buddha is hard, but scholars have agreed that it came about 500 years after the Buddha's death. A Buddha image is not only a symbol of the historical person, but the human qualities that he perfected: compassion, wisdom, patience, generosity, kindness, worthy of bowing down to. In Buddhism, there are many symbols to consider. All of them have different specific meanings, but generally they all positively represent Buddha himself and the ideas that are the basis of Buddhism. There is not much evidence of symbols from the very beginning of Buddhism. The first archaeological evidence was seen in 273 to 232 BCE at the time of the Emperor Ashoka. However, these symbols are not specifically Buddhist symbols, but belong to the Indus Valley, Vedic, and Chakravartin, and were later adopted by Buddhism. Ashoka founded the Mauryan dynasty. After many military conquests, he reigned over most of South Asia and beyond. He was famously known for his series of rock and pillar inscriptions. These were found in many different locations scattered in various parts of India. The pillars provide important information about his reign and policies. Ashoka was involved in a war in the kingdom of Kalinga. Due to the grotesque nature of the war and the fatalities, Ashoka became appalled by what had occurred. This was the reason why Ashoka converted to Buddhism. After turning to Buddhism, Ashoka was actively involved in the spread of Buddhism. He achieved this by sending out monks and nuns who had lived in the monasteries. More evidence of Buddhist symbols can be seen in later years. In the 2nd century BCE, archaeologists began excavating Buddhist monasteries. Many symbols were found in rock. This proved to be very successful because of the large amount of artwork that was discovered and has been able to withstand ages. The earliest typical Buddhist monument is the stupa. A stupa is a mass made up of mud or clay to cover supposed relics of the Buddha. After Buddha died, his body was cremated and the ashes were divided and buried under 8 separate stupas. 2 other stupas were also made to encase the container and the ashes. Although very little is known about early stupas, much more is known about later stupas such as Bharut. The Bharut stupa was established by Ashoka, and it contains many birth stories of the Buddha's previous lives, or Jataka tales. The first images of the Buddha himself appear around the 1st century BCE. Before these images appeared, artwork had been predominantly symbolic in nature. Nature images were used because in terms of aesthetics, Buddhist art is famous for giving a physical, easily recognizable representation to abstract philosophical truths. Images of the Buddha were not shown because since he had already attained enlightenment, he was beyond name and form. Thus, nature images had to be used to represent his stature. With the appearance of Buddhist Tantra around the 6th century, there was a shift in the content that was depicted in art. Tantric Buddhism, or Vajrayana, is an example of Mahayana Buddhism. Tantra consists of various differences in terms of techniques that Buddhists use. Tantric Buddhism is often viewed as the third major subdivision of Buddhism, along with the Theravada and Mahayana. This shift occurred due to the fact that imagination and visualization were focused on as a technique in meditation practices. From this time on, many deities and protectors were seen in art, but there continued to be a vast collection of symbolic art. Buddha refused to accept images of himself, for he did not want to be recognized as a person. Buddha and his teachings were so sacred and meaningful to the people, specifically the artists, that they thought that no physical image could do him justice. An example of how Buddha's teachings negated the need for representation is the concept of anatma, which implied that there was no such thing as the self. Without the self, there is no need for personal representation. Also, the concept of anitya is the characteristic of impermanence. Since nothing is permanent, nature was used to represent the Buddha because nature too is ever-changing. Therefore, to symbolize the Buddha early on, rather than drawing him, artists depicted the Buddha as various images. The Buddha was reluctant to accept images of himself because he didn't want to be venerated as a person. Buddhist symbols make up a great deal of the religion. The Bodhi tree refers to the tree under which the Buddha sat when he finally achieved enlightenment. Due to the fact that tree worship, which was in fact worship of the cult of Yashkas, who are spirits of the tree. This was already a part of the existing culture in India. The development of the tree and leaf as a devotional symbol was a natural one. The tree was significant in the Buddha's attainment of enlightenment. For 7 days after he reached enlightenment, the Buddha continued to meditate under the tree. The Bodhi tree is important because when used in art, it represents an image of the Buddha. It is clearly important because it is where he meditated, amongst nature, until he reached enlightenment. Therefore, when one sees this image, it is automatically recognized. In addition, the fact that it is a tree is significant because trees are not permanent. They grow and change and die. The next symbol is the throne, which is a direct reference to royal ancestry and the idea of spiritual kingship. The Buddha was seen as the enlightenment ruler of the spiritual world. In many ancient carvings, one can see the throne decorated with other symbols such as the wheel and the Bodhi tree. Many times, the base of the throne is also decorated with other symbols associated with the Buddhist teaching, such as lions. This shows that oftentimes many of the images and symbols were combined together. Rarely are the symbols ever found alone in artistic pieces. The next symbol is the lion, which is one of the most powerful symbols. Traditionally, lions are associated with strength and power. In this case, these qualities are applicable to the Buddha. The Buddha demonstrates his extreme strength and willingness to succeed along his path to enlightenment. The lions are typically meant to depict lions of Sarnath, which is where the Buddha first preached. Therefore, the lions, usually 4 of them, are repeating the Buddha's teachings to the world. The lions are meant to be teaching others about Buddhism. The symbol of the lion is indicative of the ever-changing animal kingdom within nature. The image of the footprint symbolizes the physical presence of the Buddha. There is a story that before the Buddha died, he left an imprint of his foot on a stone near Kusinara. This was done as a physical reminder of his presence on earth. The footprints are oftentimes decorated with other images such as Dharma wheels. Also, the images of the footprints do not look like normal feet. Instead, all the toes are shown to be of equal length. As an image of the enlightened being the chakra on the hands and feet are just one indication of his state. Clearly, when one sees a footprint, someone has been there. This is important because it shows followers that the Buddha has been there on his path to enlightenment. In a sense, it is something that can be seen as comforting for someone who is on their own path to nirvana. The symbol of the begging bowl refers to the story that before the Buddha reached enlightenment, a young woman named Sujata offered him a bowl of milk rice. At that moment, he was demonstrating his austerity by eating close to nothing. However, he realized then that he would need more strength for the final steps to enlightenment, and further fasting would only reduce his energy. The act of offering is an important aspect of Buddhism because it is good training against greed and attachment. In order to reach enlightenment, it is important to abandon attachments and eliminate greed. It is also important because it shows that people should help each other out, especially those less fortunate. Upon reaching enlightenment, the Buddha was said to have thrown away what was left in the bowl to symbolically renounce all material possessions. The middle way between extreme austerity and complete attachment to life is an important principle of Buddhism. The bowl also shows a monk's way of life. For example, monks go from the monastery to the village and live off